Good evening, my listening friends, legislators, administrators, anyone who is interested in decentralized finance, bankers, economists. If you haven't been on another planet for the last 5 or 6 years, you've certainly heard about decentralized finance. Decentralized finance, I want to just give a quick definition of what it is. Decentralized finance is an ecosystem of financial applications that are built on top of blockchain networks. DeFi aims to create an open source, permissionless, and transparent financial system that operates without any central authority. Instead, a smart contract, which is self executing with the terms of the agreement between transacting parties written into lines of code, would replace financial institutions in the transaction. For instance, I hate to break it down this basic, but if you think of a vending machine, if you put 25 cents in, you get out some Skittles. If you put 24 cents in, you get nothing. And if you put 40 cents, you get 50. So, it's a self-regulating contract. So there's no central authority, there's no bank, there's no investment house that has to oversee it. It replaces financial institutions in the transaction. That's what the self-executing contract or the smart contract does. As a result, DeFi is available to everyone with reliable access to electricity and the internet. It also serves as a form of non-custodial finance, which sort of reverses the flow of ownership back to the person that actually has the money. Since users maintain full control of their assets and transact through smart contract programs that facilitate peer-to-peer interactions. If I want to do a deal with Alex, I do with Alex. It gets verified on the blockchain. There's no attorney, there's no banker that gets 30% and gets 20% or whoever. The middleman is completely taken out of the transaction. And this is why DeFi has the capacity to really disrupt finance, the financial system as we know it today. Now, in order to remedy that, in order to maintain some stability, there needs to be legislation, and that is what the crux of our show today is going to be about. It's going to be about DeFi legislation and regulation. In addition, we've talked to some elected officials and some administrators, and sometimes they don't really understand how DeFi can really disrupt the financial system. And it's not, they tried this year, they've done a pretty good job of keeping Bitcoin below 28 grand, and that's another show that we'll talk about. But eventually, it's gonna be around, because it's not just the US. This is the whole world. This decentralized finance encompasses the whole world economic system, and that's why the solutions have to be done in concert with other countries. It's not like, back in, what was it, the early 1900s, there was a crash because one of the main reasons was every bank had their own currency. If you had a bank in Cincinnati, you had currency for the Cincinnati bank. And if you had another bank in Omaha, Nebraska, you had currency for the bank in Omaha, Nebraska. And, again, in 2008, financial derivatives, without legislation and regulation, prompted a near collapse of the system in 2008. And we were just fortunate that George Bush and Obama bailed it out. He gave them a lot of money to kind of keep things going. Right. So that won't happen again. We want to talk a little bit, about legislation that's necessary to let decentralized finance work in concert with the existing financial system, so nobody gets hurt. And if you paid attention lately, a lot of people have lost a lot of money in cryptocurrency because they didn't understand it. They said, Kim Kardashian said buy this, and Kanye said buy this, and a lot
Or
of
even
people.
Mark Cuban said buy
Yeah,
this.
Mark
Right?
Cuban, yeah, he lost money, but he can afford to lose 100
Right.
million or two, because
Right.
he's a billionaire. So it didn't hurt him as much as it did some other people. Some I happen to know personally, that got people were taking out loans on their houses because somebody told them that Dogecoin was going to go to $1 and it was 3 cent, and it
Right.
went up a little bit. And some people made money, but more people lost money than
Yeah.
made money, and that's typically what happens. So, Alex, talk a little bit about stable coins and the risk of stable coins, which really, I think, is one of the main motivating factors driving the need for legislation and regulation.
Right. Yeah. It's one of the things that like has caught regulatory interest because it's something that almost by design or by definition feels trustworthy, right? I mean, putting stable in the name um, doesn't elicit the same sort of response that, something more experimental might.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of digital assets that don't claim to be stable, that claim to solve some other problem. Um, Sort of, there's a buyer beware sort of mentality already, right? But stable coins, their whole thing is that they're stable, right? So why would somebody feel wary going into that, right? Especially if it's offering 6, 7, 8, 12, 100% APY. A lot of these things are crazy. It's like, where's that coming from, right? And that's where regulators get really interested, especially as a bunch of them start depegging and disappearing in times of prices going down instead of magically going up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've had things like Luna, obviously, that have inspired even regulatory action. I think there's even the Stablecoins Securities Act or Trust Act or something that they've been working on. And at the end of the day, um, the problem is that anything in the traditional market is fully regulated, and things like digital asset stablecoins aren't, even though some of them should be. And in fact, the SEC claims that there's thousands of DeFi projects that should be registered with them that are not registered with them.
And just if I could interject for a second. Now, last year, the U.S. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act
Mhm.
was signed into law, and it requires cryptocurrency brokers to collect know your customer information
Yeah.
for tax purposes. But it didn't do much beyond that in terms of keeping us safe. So going forward, and it was sort of done as an afterthought. Let's throw it in with the Infrastructure Act. It was
Yeah.
done sort
Some
of as an
amendments.
afterthought. It was not
Yeah.
very well thought out. So we're gonna kind of move forward from that. And Alex, if you'll continue,
Yeah.
about stable coins and that's why we wanted to do this, because that act didn't really address the
No,
issue.
it essentially replaced the word cash with digital assets in a couple lines in
Yeah.
existing legislation, right? And that's fine, but it doesn't solve the fundamental issues of why these things are so different.
Hmm.
And so you have examples of stable coins that you kind of wonder, well, how they're backed, right? And some of them are algorithmically backed, which means they have a bunch of what are known as liquidity pools that, based on an algorithmic set of rules, um, stay in ratio of assets, so that that perfect ratio of assets maintains stability of the stablecoin. And so this is like something that fluctuates. The algorithm responds
Hmm.
to fluctuations by adjusting the ratio of assets in the pool. This is fine when everything's good, but when you have crashing prices, let's say when $1 billion is thrown at strategically attacking those assets, and that creates a panic sell that sort of exacerbates that problem. And then all of a sudden your stablecoin's depegged. And the more that it's depegged, the more reaction there is until your stablecoin no longer exists. And so this is a huge issue for stablecoins that are algorithmically designed. But we also have an issue with stablecoins that claim to be backed one to one with real assets, because some of them may not be, and so they may claim that they are, but you know projects like Tether, for example, have been in litigation since at least 2018, being accused of not being backed one to one. As early as that, they used to be claimed that they were backed one to one by dollars. The
Right.
story changed, and the story has changed a ton of times since then in terms of what actually backs it. And the current story is that it's a variety of treasuries and bonds. And also that mix of what it is, they haven't revealed, and they've gotten out of audits because they claim it's a proprietary mix of assets. And so this is really concerning, right? Because they continue to print off
Mhm.
stable coins that go and flood into the exchanges. That flood of stablecoin into exchanges then beefs up the actual market caps of the other digital assets. And so at the end of the day, if one of those collapses,
Mhm.
you not only have collapse of that stablecoin if people are staking that specific one or putting their savings into it, things like that, you have an issue of the rest of the market feeling the pain of it, which is what happened after Luna. But you have the pain in the rest of the market because all of a sudden people wonder, well, where's the market caps for these tokens come from if it's
Right.
been sort of magically created in thin air out of a stable coin
Mhm.
that got injected into the into exchanges. So this is a real issue, whether it's algorithmic or not. The real issue is there isn't enough transparency on these tokens to know what's backing them or how reliable is the algorithm in case of something going horribly wrong.
It's kind of like the car business 30 years ago.
Yeah,
People still today don't know what a money factor is on a lease. Well, how much interest am I paying? What
yeah,
is your money factor? Isn't it great? Yeah, it's great, but it's not the actual uh, percentage that you're paying on the money.
right.
A
And
money
there's also
factor
the
is not
issue in
that.
terms of transparency. There's the
Mhm.
issue of the team. If
Mhm.
you most people can't read code, but there's the issue of like, are there back doors for them to slowly liquidate amounts from the liquidity pools for themselves that they shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
And this is the Luna example is an example of two of those things: an
Mhm.
algorithmic stablecoin that wasn't stable in time of attack, while also the founder had been liquidating ample amounts of tokens for himself and selling and making a ton of money along the way.
Mhm.
And obviously a big issue, and it's a big issue from a regulatory standpoint because organizations like the SEC exist to protect the investor, so people
Mhm.
feel protected by the very design and nature of what they've put money into, and they don't know the full risk. The full risks have not been disclosed to them.
Right. Right.
That's an issue.
Yeah. And also I might add that um, traditional finance is not really one to talk. There's something that a lot of financial institutions use reapothecated
Yeah.
gold futures or reapothecated treasuries. And what these are is that, I get $10 million from Alex and I loan that $10 million out 10 different times to 10 different people. And I collect interest on the $10 million 10 times. And that's what reapothecated treasuries, they do this with treasuries. They'll get a certain amount of treasuries, say, $5 million worth of treasuries, and they'll loan it out to 10 different people.
Right.
And as long as nobody actually wants their money, as long as everybody is satisfied, nobody wants all their money back, then the scheme is good. Same thing with gold futures. That's why you very seldom, with gold futures, are you able to take possession of the actual gold. Because there may be, I don't know, is there gold in Fort Knox? Maybe there's gold somewhere that backs these gold
Yeah.
futures.
But
Yeah.
JP Morgan Chase has
Mm-hmm.
paid fines on this. They ruined
Mm-hmm.
gold futures forever
Yeah.
by manipulating not just gold, but a ton of precious metal future
Mm-hmm.
prices.
Mm-hmm.
They were trading ounces of gold that don't even exist on the planet. I mean, this is
Yeah.
a real thing. And so
They
they
were
somehow
borrowed.
made
It was borrowed or reapothecated gold that was borrowed from somewhere
right.
that it didn't exist and it had already been loaned out. And that's what reapothecated means is that they
Yeah, and they just kept
built.
doing that to
Yeah.
manipulate the price.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so they somehow made a scarce asset like gold
Mm-hmm.
trade at prices of something inflationary, right? They somehow made it inflationary for their own greed. So I think that is a good point to make, that just because the digital asset world, the blockchain world, and crypto world are not doing these things yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the reality is that with some smart regulation, which
Mm-hmm.
will go into detail on, with some smart regulation, it'll actually do a better job of being transparent, of being immutable, and of being not manipulatable, right? We can design these things in a way because of the nature of blockchain
Mm-hmm.
that they can't be manipulated and they
Manipulated,
can't
right,
be used
right,
against
right.
people if you have the right framework around it. It'll do a better job than the traditional system because obviously, whatever regulators and the SEC say, the reality is that the traditional system is failing us in a lot of ways, and it's not sustainable even.
Right, right. And blockchain is by its nature is verifiable.
Right.
So I couldn't take $10 million and I couldn't take 10 million ounces of gold that I borrowed from Alex and loan out 100 million ounces
Mm-hmm.
because the blockchain would not let you do that.
Right.
It
You
would
can't
say there's
lie
no,
about what you have
you can't
either.
lie about what you have because
Yeah.
it exists on the blockchain. There's a ledger for everyone to see, and if you take something from here and you put it over there and it's not there anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
and
Yeah.
and and it's run by a smart contract that eliminates that sort of thing. So I think legislation. I think there's going to have to be legislation regulation done with decentralized finance as well as traditional finance,
Yeah.
because a lot of the things that people have been getting away with are causing a lot of issues, and a lot of these same things they try to bring to DeFi, and that's why people are trying to there's a gentleman now that was going to buy Twitter. Well, he decided he didn't want to buy it after he jacked the price up and made some money on it, and he said, well, I don't want to buy it, and then the price went down, and I guess he probably shorted it and made a little more money, and now it's in court where they're going to say, well, you got to buy it, you had a contract, you have to buy it. So
Well, they're probably going to make him. He's either going to pay the $1 billion fine that was in the agreement for not buying it,
right.
or they're going to make him.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think he will end up buying it, but
Uh,
it's one of the things that I think everybody would like. But what they could end up doing is charging him the $1 billion fine plus losses. And those losses are the difference
oh yeah,
between
yeah,
the price that he wanted to buy it at and the price that it's at
yeah,
now,
yeah.
because everybody was expecting to
Everybody
be
was expecting to
paid.
buy it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The agreement was they were going to be paid for that price that he bought it at. Right. And so that's a big, but yeah, that's traditional finance, right?
Yeah, that's
That's the
traditional
reality is,
finance. That's manipulation, and if you
right.
got enough money, you can do it too.
Right.
But what happens is that um, a lot of people probably got creamed on that deal, because they were going long on Twitter, and for a
Yeah.
while, a lot of people made a lot of money, and then the guy
Yeah.
that went short on it, that knew he wasn't going to buy it.
Everybody loses but the lawyers in this case.
Yeah, everybody loses with the lawyers. Yeah, yeah. 'Cause, with anytime somebody makes money, somebody loses money. So,
Yeah.
and so that's really the sort of thing, in addition to decentralized finance, that has to be checked, man. And I
Yeah.
think for so long, you know, um, before it was too big to fail, and I think for so long, financial institutions have done, like their reapothecated treasures in gold. I mean, that's crazy, man. You can loan out 10 times what you actually hold. And the thing with treasuries and with futures, nobody actually knows who holds it and who actually has it. In
Right.
case everyone would want their money back at once. That's what Too Big to Fail did with the derivatives.
Yeah.
You know,
It's virtualized.
yeah,
It's fictitious.
yeah,
What Marx referred to as fictitious capital, right?
that
And the issue
fictitious
is that when
capital.
you have an inflationary currency that you can print off at will to fund things that don't exist, in order to continue centralizing wealth and power towards the top,
Mm-hmm.
you have a broken financial system. It's not sustainable. When
Mm-hmm.
you have somebody like Nancy Pelosi who's able to, essentially insider trade,
Mm-hmm.
where she's co-signing a blue chip, or the chip bill, not the blue chip, the chip bill, and
Mm-hmm.
then also her husband's making $2 million on Nvidia stock, and
Mm-hmm.
then she performatively sells $340,000 worth of it to make it look like they didn't just make
But
2 million.
she's got a good job though. I mean, anybody making 150 grand a year
Right.
could amass 120 million dollars
Right. Yeah, and
if
it's
you're in the
even
government.
legal.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
legal. It's illegal to even ask any
Yeah,
regulators,
yeah.
or it's illegal to ask any legislators
Hmm.
about anything that could be related to things that they're working on.
And we don't
And so,
even want to talk about what happened in 2020
right.
with
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't even want to talk about
It's
that. But
it's just so sad. And so
yeah.
the reality is that there's a lot of non-transparent things that happen. There's a lot of like hidden things that happen, and there's even a lot of visible things that happen but are completely okay
Hmm.
because the system itself is poorly designed. And
Right, right.
and so blockchain fundamentally solves all those things, but we still do need these regulatory models to help people transition
Hmm.
to it smartly.
Right, right, right. Um, you have to. Capitalism is changing. We talk a lot about the different economic systems. They come and they last for about 300 or 400 years, and then they go and they're replaced by something. Sometimes it's a new form of the old system. You know, labor. The monetization of labor sort of replaced slavery,
Mm-hmm.
which was the monetization of labor. But it's still sort of the same system. And I think with decentralized finance, with more accountability and verifiability in the system, I don't know how compatible that will be with existing financial systems that we have them now,
Yeah.
because a lot of things that happen and that people do, they won't be able to do.
We're moving towards monetization of participation, right? And monetization of data.
Right.
And that's a very different future.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, Even in terms of, employment, what's different about this revolution, this fourth industrial revolution,
Mm-hmm.
is that workers won't have their work as leverage for very
Mm-hmm.
long.
Right.
Unlike former revolutions where workers were able to change things and change the very economic system and their position in it by saying, we're not going to work. Now, in a future where you don't have to work, that labor is no longer leverage,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, what is leverage? I think leverage is participating in alternative economies and
Mm-hmm.
participating in alternative systems that you own, right? And that's the
Mm-hmm.
only way to circumvent um, the continued centralization of wealth and power towards
Mm-hmm.
a techno feudalism future where the tech giants own everything and everybody sort of just has to live
Right.
by those rules. And that's why decentralization, of course, is really important for that
Right.
economic future that's equitable and accessible.
Right. And the way things are going now, the concentration, the rate of wealth concentration has been increasing, and it's increasing more and more. And it's, unchecked, it will get to the point where you'll have five people that own everything.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think, decentralized finance is something that's not going away. Um, there are countries that already use it. I think, what is it, Argentina accepts Bitcoin as a currency. I know many transactions in Africa, Nigeria, and some other countries. I think Ethiopia had just declared one of the currencies. It wasn't, was it Ethereum, or was one of the currencies as the
Cardano.
Cardano, yeah, as the
Yeah.
national currency. So I think a lot of countries are sort of moving. Even the war in Ukraine, Zelensky was able to get money to people because people donated currency, and he was able to airdrop digital currency to
Right.
people so they could buy food. So
Yeah.
I think airdropping dollars probably wouldn't have worked too good. But he
Just
was able
floating
to,
down to the
yeah,
air.
yeah, he was able to airdrop digital currency so people could subsist, and to the soldiers in the field, to the people that need to get money, and that's, I guess, an example of how digital currency is going to shape, the financial world financial system a little differently than it is now, and obviously a lot of people don't want to see that happen, but I don't know what choice there is. I mean, I think this is just something that it's just like, when somebody built a car, you knew there was going to be a lot of pollution, but
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't really stop it, but now we have to stop it because we don't have a choice because we're all burning up now. You know, so same thing. You know, with digital currency, I think digital currency is going to disrupt the world financial system
Yeah.
unless it's properly regulated. And I think this has to be done in concert with other countries because of the you know the nature of the internet. You can't just do it here in this country. You know, and
Yeah.
I think Europe is a lot. The EU is a lot farther ahead of us in terms of regulating digital currency. And
Yeah. I mean, they've tried.
mm-hmm,
I think we're both in this sort of like
mm-hmm,
situation where one of us will get close to like something that makes sense, and then like we'll kind of somebody else will hurriedly take it back, right? And so the EU is in the same situation where some of the proposals have made a ton of sense, and
mm-hmm,
others have been sort of a sudden fear response.
right.
But we're both working towards what is the definition of digital assets, right? And
Mm-hmm,
even you can tell by the wording of those amendments from the 2021 Act,
mm-hmm,
the reality is that we still are not entirely sure as a regulatory body what digital assets are or what the implications are in terms of regulation.
mm-hmm,
And so there's a lot of like really hard questions to answer. And part of the problem is that the government works sometimes decades slower than the technology itself. And this is just a pain point in terms of, um, you know, bureaucracy and oftentimes even, you know, the technical acumen and innovation acumen of, you know, regulators versus
mm-hmm.
the industry itself and sort of what's happening on the ground floor. And we saw that with the internet to begin with, right? I mean, it took a long time for some regulation that made sense for the internet in terms of protecting net neutrality, in terms of, you know, protecting people from things like cyberbullying, even, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
it
mm-hmm,
was legal for a long time to just like, you know, harass people on
mm-hmm.
the internet, like
Yeah,
and so there's a lot of things that took a long time with the internet in general, and hopefully we can move quicker with this stuff. But the reality is that understanding what even smart contracts are, what DeFi is already a bit of a learning. I mean, it's a serious learning curve for
mm-hmm.
people who may struggle even with what the first internet, how it works,
Yeah, yeah,
understanding how code runs,
mm-hmm,
or how to see code, or how to see a ledger, see the records of transactions,
mm-hmm,
just the visibility of cryptographic addresses
mm-hmm.
can make people uncomfortable. And so
Yeah, yeah, and
there's a
it's
lot
been
of
a
growing
real
pains.
right. And one of the problems we have in this, I think, in the United States is that schools are being regulated by politicians and not by educators.
Right.
And what's taught in schools is not, I feel, what should be taught.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, I know when I was in high school, you could, you know, you could take auto mechanics. You could be on a college track. You could learn how to be an electrician. You could work towards being a journeyman plumber. And a lot of that doesn't exist. It's almost like, you know, they said, well, you know, you either go to college or you're going to be a failure. But now all those jobs, there's not enough people to do all those jobs. And a lot of them are very well paying jobs. And
Yeah.
I think what's happening now is that there's no reason that code shouldn't be taught in sixth, seventh grade.
Right.
And kids should start learning how to code um, as soon as they learn algebra,
Yeah.
you know, which is usually seventh grade, sixth or seventh grade. They should learn how to code.
Yeah.
So by the time, you know, they get to high school and get to college, because there's nothing that says you have to have a master's degree to know how to code, but you have to know how to code. So
Yeah.
I think if you could, you know, and that's something that we're going to need in the future, you know,
Mhm.
people that know how to code, people that understand code to be able to make decisions, because we have people
Yeah.
now, you know, that are in decision making positions that really don't understand code. You know,
Right.
they
The
don't
government
understand.
needs
Yeah.
talent. It needs competitive talent
Mm-hmm.
um, in every technical
Yeah.
aspect.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
in order because the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, okay, not every lawmaker is going to know. how to read a smart contract. Not every lawmaker is going to know where to look to read a smart contract. It's just that's reality, right? But every lawmaker should probably have a couple people on their staff who do.
Right.
And that's really important because you need those professional opinions from experts who are sourced and talented at their job, so that when you write legislation that impacts an industry, and so there's often this paradox too. The government does rely on a lot of outside contracting to do things. I mean, one example, of course, is the way that nonprofits has sort of taken up a lot of responsibility around regulation of the ocean, for example, of like keeping the ocean clean. Come to find out, they have close ties with some of the fishing companies and things like that. And so you run into this issue where the government's relying on agencies that have association with nonprofit, or relying on nonprofits, and those nonprofits have non-kosher relationships with capitalistic interest. Right. And so maybe they're incentivized by donations and financial relationships more than they're incentivized by like protecting the ocean. And so you run into that paradox a lot of like, okay, well, the government doesn't have the experts hired themselves, so they're relying on an outside vendor, and that outside vendor then has more aspects of vulnerability in terms of its influences by other third parties that maybe have other agenda. And so the reality is that the government, as a regulating body, does need to hire competitive talent to understand the domains in which it regulates.
I think they need to understand coding. I mean, if any legislator, we have a few legislators that listen to the program. If you want to understand how this impacts you, and you really want to understand coding, reach out to us. It's show@thedeficollective.com. Show@thedeficollective.com is our email, and we'll be happy to share with you what we know, and what we don't know. We can certainly put you in touch with someone who could be very helpful, because I think a lot of times what drives decision making in capitalism is making money. It's not always what's best for the country or what's best for the people. It's what makes the most money. And if by chance it can be good for the people, then so be it. But if it's not, then well, it's a free market.
The more our world is digital, the more that our regulation needs to be cognizant of what makes a digital world. What makes a digital world is code. I mean, every line, every fiber of a digital world is code under the hood, right? And so what is I think this leads to one of our most important points in this show today is like, what does regulation look like for DeFi? And I mentioned before, the SEC sort of has this mentality of like same risk, same rules. And that's not necessarily true, because what blockchain fundamentally solves comes down to issues of transparency, comes down to issues of consensus mechanism that's reliable, it's immutable, it's non-changeable. You can't change the public record. So a lot of regulation historically has been around those things. It's been around transparency, it's been around record keeping, and it's been around data redundancy. It's been around things like know your customer. These are things that are really important in traditional finance, because without them, you don't have finance. You have sort of people stealing from each other. And so what blockchain solves fundamentally with that problem, and the reason why a lot of like really crypto purists are completely against any regulation or government interference at all, is because they feel that blockchain actually removes the need for any sort of centralized regulating body or centralization at all. Now, I'm not in that camp. I think that we do need regulation, but I think the regulation needs to be cognizant of what the technology solves. And I think a lot of that comes down to, there's still problems, right? One of the problems, of course, is pseudonymity.
Pseudonymity.
Yes. Really, everybody's known by an address, right, instead of themselves. And that's an issue if you're maybe dealing with a bad actor. and that's why
Right.
things like KYC still come up a lot.
Right.
But I have an idea about KYC that's relatively novel that I'll bring up in a second. But
Okay.
one of the main issues, of course, is transparency.
KYC is again for those who
Know your customer.
know your customer. Okay.
Yeah. And it's part of what's more broadly known as like AML, anti-money laundering.
Okay.
And so that's sort of used as an umbrella of like like preventing any misuse of funds or crime as well. Um, but you also have issues of transparency, because even though the blockchain itself is transparent, um, the reality is that part of that transparency is also being able to read the code. And so this is why it's a bit of a transition from what we were talking about. Being able to read the code is something that most people can't do. So
Right.
an average person who wants to invest in a DeFi, let's say an AMM, an automatic market maker, they want to throw $1,000 of Ethereum in, and they want to earn a return on that for putting it into the DeFi pool. They want to provide liquidity and earn rewards on top of it, right? Investment strategy, pretty simple. If they can't read the smart contracts, or they don't know where to look, or they don't know what they are, how can they be sure that there isn't a backdoor where the founders or the devs are going to be liquidating the funds from the pool that they just put in and then putting it in their own pocket, right?
Right.
That's something that has come up over and over and over again.
Which
right.
has happened in quite a few
a
cases.
lot.
That
Yeah.
happens a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. They wait for the pot to get really big and then they pull it all out for themselves, right? It's known as a rug pull.
Pump and dump. Yeah.
Yeah, pump and dump, or a rug pull.
Rug pull. Yeah.
Where they sort of just take all the funds out. Thank you very much. And then they disappear into the wind. And part of that is the fact that you also don't know who they are. You just know their addresses, and you can start tracking those addresses as bad acting addresses and blacklist them throughout the entire ecosystem. But, from the government's perspective, one, how do their goals, or how do they prevent that, or at least make sure that investors are aware of the risks? And their second goal, of course, is how do they know who the bad actors were? and these are serious fundamental issues. Now, part of it is what decentralized regulation looks like for DeFi, and for even like things like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. What regulation looks like for that could involve regulating standards, and that could be smart contracts that are included in the protocol itself. So let's say you want to issue some form of what the SEC would consider a security. You register with the SEC as an autonomous, a decentralized organization of some kind. There could be multiple categories in the future. You register your founding addresses. You do some sort of novel KYC that's maybe more interesting. And then as a part of that, your established base code of what those tokens look like and what the rules are, maybe start as a regulatory set of smart contracts that allow it to be secured, or believe, it's something that can be trusted, because you're starting with that. Now, let's say yours is more complex, then the government could require you to have some sort of token issued to you from an auditor. So let's say you need to be audited by a auditing organization that's regulated itself, and that auditing regulating body does an audit of your code, runs a series of tests on it, tries to break it, does all of these things on the code, checks what every function does. They are experts in doing this. There's already organizations that do this. My company, for example, we have to be audited. We run audits all the time with external bodies. So that already exists, and the government can utilize that and issue tokens. And only once those tokens are issued, based on the regulation smart contracts, only once those auditing tokens are issued, then it can work. And if those auditing tokens are revoked, then it no longer works. So there's all of these things can be automated and baked into the code itself. And that's a powerful tool, and it would actually cut down on cost, and it would increase reliability of regulation. It's not just regulation that people just sort of like follow because they're supposed to. It's regulation that has to be followed because it's part of the underlying code of each system itself. That's pretty novel and powerful. Now, in terms of the KYC problem of like knowing your customer,
Mm-hmm.
um, cryptographic solutions and now blockchain offers something known as zero knowledge proofs. Now, we could probably do an entire episode on zero knowledge and what that means. But the idea is, let's say um, I'm signing up for a lease of an apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And now the way that it works right now is that I need to give a landlord all of my information, right? Now, if you're dealing with like a large management company, you're usually not concerned with giving them your social security number, letting them run a credit check, all this stuff, right? Now, it's a lot of information, though. It's a breach of privacy.
It's not information that they need in order to make a
Right. They
decision.
don't need all of
Yeah,
that.
they don't
All
need
they
all
need
that.
is verification, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where zero knowledge proofs come in. Zero knowledge proofs are a cryptographic proof that you match the criteria without giving them all of your information.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a big improvement because right now, if I want to rent an apartment from some random person, I don't know their criminal background.
Right.
I don't know their history. I don't know who they are. I am, if I'm a student going into a new college town to move in and I have to give some random landlord all of my information and they could ruin my life, like that's sort of a weird thing that people just trust
It's
that
not
over
so
time.
weird. It happens a lot.
Right. In theory, like as a concept, it's like kind of a weird thing that people do every day.
Okay.
And so zero knowledge proofs solve that problem, and they could solve that problem in a regulatory sense for knowing your customer. You could sort of know your customer without knowing your customer.
Yeah.
You could know your customer by proving certain pieces of information, and you could continue to require
proving you are who you say you are.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like you don't need to know my credit score. You need a 725 credit score to buy this car.
Yeah.
Is Robert's credit score higher than 725? Yes.
You
So
need to know I qualify.
if
Right.
it's 726 or if it's 8. You don't need to know that. You don't need to know
Right.
what's on there. All you need you need to know is has he paid all of his cars on time. That's
Exactly.
really all you need to know.
Yep.
You don't need my social security number and my all that kind of stuff. So I think zero knowledge proofs will go a long way towards protecting privacy
Right.
because everything just about is available on the dark web. Just about everybody's information, you can go on the dark web and find it.
Yeah.
And if you're not there, you're pretty good at protecting your privacy, or either you have a pseudonym or
Right.
alternative existence or something. I don't know how you get around it, but I think the problem comes because legislators, and I'm speaking of federal, the Congress and senators, if you don't really understand code, how can you regulate code?
Right.
Now, if the only legitimate foolproof regulation in a smart contract, the regulation will have to be written into the contract. Like a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, which is a democratically run organization where everybody votes on what they're going to do. Like if Alex and I had a company and 40 other people and 42 people would make decisions about what we do. Do we expand? Let's vote on. Do we? So that's a DAO, and a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, is run by code.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to regulate something like that, the regulation would have to be in the code for a couple of reasons. For one reason is because the legislators don't really understand the code, and it's not something, once it's regulated, it's not autonomous. So the safeguards, maybe safeguards is a better word than regulation. So the safeguards would have to be within the code, and if you don't really understand the code, then you can't really make that decision, and that may be why, this the Infrastructure Act, the what was it called? The U.S. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which they kind of threw cryptocurrency in as an afterthought. That's probably why that was an afterthought, because nobody really understood how to regulate it.
Right. Yeah.
And this year, there have been more people that got ripped off with cryptocurrency scams than I think at any time in history.
Right.
Because the act, it didn't cover a lot of things. It didn't. The act won't go after miners, validators, or developers of blockchains, and it's really not clear who's covered. It requires all cryptocurrency transactions over 10,000 reported to the IRS. If you're dealing with Binance or Crypto.com or something, and requires the collection of KYC, know your customer, from the counterparties involved in these transactions. But a lot of it remains unclear because I don't think they really understood it.
Right.
I really don't think they really understood, and so I think part of our challenge may be to help educate our elected officials. I don't know,
Yeah. Education's the big.
education is a
It's
big
a
thing,
big thing.
and maybe
Yeah.
you know get some people together who could maybe act as a sounding board, or maybe have some understanding of what's required, and try to explain it. Because I think the reason this was thrown in is because nobody really understood it.
Yeah.
I guarantee you right now, if you were to ask 100 senators to explain a smart contract, you probably could get four that
Yeah.
actually know what it was.
Well, the reality is, people in crypto have to be more participant. I mean, they have to be a part of this process, and I think this is why I work in institutional blockchain, and we have to be really well regulated. We have a bank charter, so it's very important for us. We're undergoing all sorts of compliance all the time. But the reality is that even in the way the SEC writes about crypto, they have an innovation um, group inside of the SEC that they encourage crypto dev and founders to meet with, because as part of the registration process, which most DeFi platforms should be registering something with the SEC, or at least having that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you put in the effort as part of that, and this body, apparently this innovations uh, department of the SEC, has no problem meeting multiple times, listening to presentations. Apparently, they're very open. They claim to be very open to new ideas and to learning. And so you have two options as a crypto, starting a crypto project right now.
Mm-hmm.
You either don't do that, and
Yeah.
you risk all the regulation that's coming. One, not being cognizant of how you work or how the industry works at all,
Mm-hmm.
and two, coming after you,
Mm-hmm.
for hundreds of, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the reality is that they're not being, they're using these as examples.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do meet with them, you have the ability to influence where these things go.
Right.
And I think that's really important. A lot of people in crypto sort of have this mentality that everything's like these governing bodies and even institutions themselves are sort of going to like topple over now that crypto exists. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily realistic. Realistically, a lot of things will die out or just sort of organically grow into something that's more relevant.
Mm-hmm.
That's how things work with any new innovation. You have some companies or bodies that disappear, and you have some that evolve, right? But if you want the important ones to evolve right now with the least amount of pain, you have to be a part of the process to educate them. And so I strongly suggest meeting with regulators, meeting with
Mm-hmm.
SEC representatives, and doing that education process. Um, if you're working in crypto, if you're a part of crypto, because if you don't do it, then they're definitely not gonna know.
Right.
they're,
For
they're
sure.
they're definitely not gonna have any idea what's going on, and then we're gonna face the pain of that later.
Right. And I think a lot of it, if you look at the act, um, I think the main um, impetus of it was to make sure they could tax transactions over $10,000,
Right.
and everything else was sort of, you know, around that. So there's still it's about profit. The financial system is about profit, and I don't know if I mean, there's going to be money made, but I don't know if basing everything, on how much money you can make is always the best for moving technology forward. Because a
Right.
lot of times when you move technology forward, it may not be um, a financial windfall.
Yeah.
I mean, if as we drive less and there's less oil consumed, which we're going to electric vehicles at some point. A lot of people are going to lose a lot of money. There won't be as much money made.
Yeah.
But the technology is moving forward. The batteries are becoming more sophisticated and better. The price of electric automobiles is coming down. GM has got one now, vote under 30 grand, which is pretty remarkable.
Hmm.
You know, um, so I think, in regulation too. I think I'm not so sure if they really understand the spirit of decentralized finance,
Right.
and really what, maybe we could talk about that for a second. What it actually means and what it actually will do or can do, and not to even mention blockchain voting, because you could solve that whole problem tomorrow
Right.
by having
Yeah.
it voting on a
it's
blockchain.
it's efficiency, right?
It's
And
efficiency,
it's
right?
also, creating something that's equitable and accessible for
Right.
everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it so progressive.
Mm-hmm.
What a lot of, I think you made a really good point around the wording being really like
Mm-hmm.
over $10,000. It's about how taxable that
It's
is.
about collecting taxes. They
And
saw
they
everybody making money.
claim,
Yeah.
yeah, they claim it's to protect the retail investor, it's
Yeah.
protect people.
Right.
But you making money on taxes over transactions isn't what protects the consumer. Um, that's you making
Mm-hmm.
tax money, right?
Right.
So like if somebody then gets screwed by a DeFi protocol, it doesn't, that's not your laws about taxation and amounts doesn't do anything for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's one thing, but the underlying spirit of this technology to begin with, um, it's not so much rebellion. A lot of people in crypto even uh, see it as like somewhat of a rebellion against the traditional system
Yeah, they
that's
do.
failed
Yeah.
us. But
Sticking
at
to
the
the
end of the day,
capitalists. Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's evolution of technology to solve problems in better ways.
Evolution of the finance, economic systems
Right.
that the world has relied on too.
And even just our general exchange of goods and services, our creative process, our ownership of our own data. This
Right.
is evolution of those things. And any lawmaker who fights for ownership and equity and access for people needs to understand that this solves those fundamental issues while also making it easier to regulate. It makes it easier for governance because the governance is baked into the design of
Smart
the system,
contract. Right.
and that is sort of a really miraculous
Mm-hmm.
move forward.
Right. And if you understand coding, when the regulation is baked into the smart contract, you can verify that it's legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
And you won't have to worry about things like rehypothecated treasuries and derivatives. A lot of these things are just you know ways to make money.
Yep.
They're just ways to make money. They don't really have any other utility other than making money. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but at some point, with wealth being concentrated the way it is, you're not going to have a sustainable society. I mean, pretty soon, when everything's automated, what are people going to do? So I don't know if those conversations have taken place because it's always about, well, let's just put them on welfare. Let's just bail them out. Let's just give them
Right.
a food stamp. And I think there has to be some conversation, about what society may look like. You know,
Yeah.
and I just wonder.
The WEF, the World Economic Forum, talks about
Hmm.
this stuff all the time because it
Hmm.
brings, economists from around the world together to discuss this stuff.
Hmm.
And a lot of them understand very well what the options are.
Right,
Um,
right.
and the trajectories, a lot of them are very dystopian.
Hmm.
The reality is that if we don't need to work and everything is still centralized, then we are essentially creating we it becomes a creator economy, right? Which is where
Hmm.
we're moving anyway.
Right, right,
It
right.
becomes an economy of passion, of like working on the things that you care about,
Hmm.
or it becomes one of like kind of just being dead inside and not having anything, like
I totally
and
agree.
so
Yeah.
really the way to almost like force that creator economy and ensure that it becomes an economy that we can all be proud of
Hmm.
um, is by decentralizing ownership of that digital economy.
Right, right, right.
If it's not owned by a few at the top who just sort of own everybody and everything, and
Hmm.
it's owned by everybody who participates democratically
Hmm.
in something designed at the
Hmm.
ground level to be that.
Hmm.
And then all the work is automated, but we all reap the benefits of that. That reverses that. That's when we talk about the reverse of ownership, it reverses the flow of that ownership. Then we all own the economy that's the hard work's being done automatically,
Hmm.
but the fun things are things that we all can participate in and reap the benefits of that sort of egalitarian future together.
Okay.
So,
And I think what's necessary is for our administrators and legislators to familiarize themselves with coding,
mhm.
and to have these, you know, people in Congress, they run every 2 years. So most of their time is spent making, raising money so they can run again.
Yeah,
So they're always campaigning. So I don't really know if the way the system is set up, if they could have time to kind of sit back and say, hey, what's best for everyone? What's best for the country? What's best for the world?
right,
Not just I want to get these jobs for my constituents. I mean, it's very short sighted. And I think you know you have to look down the road. It's got to be some sort of downstream planning,
yeah,
and you can't really do that with the way the economic system is changing, is going through a change, without understanding coding.
yeah,
Because capitalism, like feudalism and slavery and mercantilism and industrialism, they all are born, they last for 300 to 400 years, and then they go away,
right,
and they're replaced by something. You know, Capitalism is a great system for making money, but everything's driven by making money. It doesn't make society better. So I think the challenge is going to be to integrate DeFi into capitalism, or whatever the next system may be, in order to make make the world livable and sustainable.
yeah.
Because when you're
Let's
just making money, everything the I mean the global warming, the rivers are polluted and blah blah blah. It's not a good situation for everybody.
right,
And pretty soon there won't be any place for the rich people to go. Maybe that's why they're trying to go to the moon or something. I don't know, because soon, you know. So I think it has to be done in concert, with DeFi, and to do that you have to really understand coding and how the whole decentralized finance network works.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, DeFi is sort of being designed off of the case of what capitalism currently looks like. It's
Mm-hmm.
recreating a lot of those tools in a more equitable and decentralized way.
Mm-hmm.
But the fundamentals of what those functions are is going to be really relevant no matter what the quote unquote currencies or commodities or asset types or securities are in the future. And so as we move past the even past the fiduciary system or whatever comes next, um, the underlying premise of a decentralized set of instruments that allow people to exchange goods and services with each other and a variety of different commodities more well fitted and designed for the digital economy.
Mm-hmm.
These DeFi protocols and even things like automatic market making and things like that are going to be still really critical
Mm-hmm.
to maintaining stability and maintaining ownership in that economy.
Right, right,
So DeFi concepts will continue to live,
right. Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of DeFi is part of that transition, even in terms of what those assets look like.
Right. And change is never easy, especially when, the financial system is changing, and there have been a lot of problems with the present system, not the least of which is the concentration of wealth. But there's just been a lot of problems, and you can only throw money at it so long, because we're in the United States, we're not the financial power that we used to be. So we just can't keep throwing money at it, and pretty soon we'll have to figure out how to, make this system work for everybody and be more equitable.
Yeah.
Russia, China, India, South Africa, and what is the other? Russia, China, India, and South Africa. And there's one more country where half the people in the world live in those countries, and they're really not with us on a lot of things anymore.
Right.
So they're sort of developing their economy, and we're kind of in debt
Yeah.
to a few of those countries. So I think at some point we have to say, hey, what's best for our own survival. We're having issues now because we wanted to make things in China because it was cheaper, but now if they keep on like they're doing, we'll be at war with China. So we don't have chips now. I've been looking for a car. There's no cars. I said, where are the cars at, man? Used to have 300 cars on this lot. Well, we don't have chips. And then the cars they do have, it says, well, the lift gate doesn't work and the auto start doesn't work because we had to ration the chips out. I said, so I'm paying 45, 50 grand, and things don't work on a car. Yeah,
Right.
but when we get the chips, we'll put them in and fix it for you. Because we wanted to make them cheaper somewhere else. And economic warfare and economic capitalism, we're not good at that right now. So I think a lot of that stuff, I'm glad to see the CHIPS Act pass. We can start making chips at home, but I think we have to think further down the road, with DeFi, and see how we can best, make this work for everybody.
Right.
So yeah. Well, if you think you're confused, you're not alone. We are too, but we're going to keep talking about it and trying to come up with some solutions. This, financial system, the economic system that we have, is changing. They all change.
Yeah.
And DeFi seems to be, decentralized finance and blockchain seems to be what's on the horizon.
Yeah.
Now, I don't see anything else. Maybe it'll be something else. But I think the decentralized finance has the potential to be a more equitable system, and a system that's not based on just making money. And I think this is why you had so many crashes of cryptocurrency, because people were getting into it for just making money.
Right.
It's people that watch the show, about half the people, they want to know, hey, what currency should I buy? You know,
Yeah.
it's it's much deeper than just the currency.
It's about
it's a whole
fundamental
system.
shift.
It's about
Yeah.
fundamental. Yeah, it's a fundamental shift, or a
Yeah.
paradigm shift, as they like to say. And as things shift, we have to have our leaders, our elected officials, and administrators have to learn coding. Yeah, maybe we need to elect some coders, because this is kind of where things are going. Especially
Yeah.
with the surveillance capitalism. You gotta understand code, or you're gonna be left behind. The
Right.
way society's going, you're gonna be totally so far behind. There's people still don't believe in computers, if you can believe that. So I mean, it's just gonna be even worse. So yeah.
Yeah.
But we want to thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your time. But unfortunately, ours is up. But if you want to reach out to us, show@the is our email, and we certainly welcome any suggestions, criticisms. We'd love to have you if you're a coder. If you're involved in this, we'd love to have you on the show. Please reach out to us. I'm Robert, and this is Alex. And until next week, have a great week
Have a
and
good
learn
one.
some code. Okay.